Greetings, ladies and gentle readers. I'm Dward, and I did not finish Ghost of the Truthseeker, a LitRpg adventure. Despite clearly 1,500 ratings, a lot of people did. This is my first book back in about a month because I've been playing a lot of Baldurs Gate 3. It released this month, and like many, I am addicted to it. But it also got me thinking. Since I do also read a lot of LitRpg, I think there's a lot of things LitRpg authors and cultivation authors can probably learn from a game like Baldur's Gate, or more, I guess, more to the point, D&D and pen and paper RPG. Because on one hand, you've got video games and pen and paper games that are role-playing games, and you've got these books, which are essentially literary adventures of RPGs. But I think a lot of these authors make some very bizarre mistakes, and I kind of want to talk about these. Or at least things that could maybe learn from their pen and paper or video game counterparts. But before we dive into that, let me give other examples of even larger stories that I think kind of get these ideas nailed down perfectly and why they've did so well. So in a bit of a different genre, cultivation, I'd say LitRpg and cultivation are sisters in the overall fantasy genre. Not exactly twins, but they've got a lot of similarities. And one thing an immensely popular series like Cradle did well, never mind the plot line or the characters, both of which kind of need to be pretty high up there in tiers in order to, get the sheer amount of following that it had. As you can see, 15,000 reviews on book one. And that is, anytime you're writing a cultivation or a LitRpg or whatever, you know that your characters are going to get stronger. The question then becomes, how are the readers going to be able to both be invested in the progress of the character, kind of root for the progress of the character, and actively want your characters to get something else, right? They're rooting and hoping that, I hope they get that one thing eventually because, they so deserve it. You know that feeling? Cradle did it pretty well. Cradle divides the power in the world up into essentially metal-based progression system, or, well, not complete metal. Like the first one's like wood, or whatever, and then it goes to bronze? No, I think it goes to copper, and then iron, and then gold, I want to say. You get the idea. And so while they might be picking up a skill here or there in like wood or gold or wherever, you have a clear progression system, and you want them to get to the next tier. You want them to go from like wood to iron, and then iron to gold, gold to true gold, and so on and so forth. So whatever they're doing in between there, you're rooting for them because you know there's a nice clear tier they're going to get, and you want them to get to that next tier. And in that way, you can get behind the character, you understand what they're striving for, and you really, really, really want them to succeed in getting that kind of next power level that they're clearly striving for to do whatever it is they're trying to do in the book. And Cradle nails that very, very well. Another one that does it really, really well, in my opinion, is, even though it isn't quite labeled in the title as a LitRpg, it's got LitRpg mechanics, because it's got stat screens and stat progression. It's Iron Prince, wildly successful, 5-star, solid 14,000 reviews. Such a good book, and one of the reasons, among many, why it does so well is because it's got clear progression for the characters that the reader can root for. It's got a little bit of a funky one. It's letter-based rather than metal-based, for example, or metal and gem-based or whatever, like the last one was. In this one, it's essentially F through S, but it's broken into a little bit of subcategories. It's not like just, someone's like a D-class character, and then they go on a training montage, and then they're a C-class character. No. the rank is broken down into substats that are also graded. So you might have like a character with a strength of, let's say, F5 or something. And as the book progresses, you can clearly see, their strength's getting stronger. They're going from, they're going through the Fs, and then they finally rank up to D. And you're rooting for them to get that D strength. And then once again, it starts over. Like, as they're progressing, they're kind of going through the D ranks. And then eventually, they're going to get C strength. And through the book, there's clear indications of what these little minor skill ups and these major skill ups are actually doing for the characters in question. So you can kind of see and understand the progression is taking place. You're rooting for them to go an entire level above where they are and get like that next letter of level to get that much stronger. And yeah, you can follow it. The characters can follow it. It's very concise. You understand what the stats mean. You understand their impact. It's fantastic because you can follow along, because you know where it's going, because you understand what is happening there. It's just stars across the board. And that brings me what a lot of authors can learn from good old Baldurs Gate 3. Because Baldurs Gate 3, the D&D model, nails it very, very nicely all the same. Like, you're going through this world, you got a whole bunch of places you're going to, a whole bunch of places you're meeting, and your stats are very, very low, but as a result, when it goes up, it's meaningful. Whether we're talking about Cradle, whether we're talking about Iron Prince, we're talking about Baldur's Gate, the important overlapping arc here is when you're going on these quests, where you're going on these adventures, you're doing all this different stuff. It's important for your readers, or your players in this case, to be able to follow along and understand, like, what is the next progression that I'm going for? Is it impactful? Does it do something? Or is it just going to get, like, lost in the shuffle, right? Baldur's Gate 3 did that amazingly well. When you got your next stat point, oh my god, it was an entirely +1 to something. You felt that you now had like 20 strength instead of 19 because it made a difference. When the characters in Iron Prince, they finally went from like D strength to C strength. It made a difference. You were able to follow along. You knew something was going on there. When we go to Cradle, he goes up from wood to copper. You know something's going on there. When he finally gets gold, you're feeling the strength and you can follow along with the strength progression. It makes sense. You were rooting for it. You were hoping they got it the entire time. In every instance, Baldur's Gate 3, Iron Prince, Cradle, they all share that similarity. If I was to go even further, I'm pretty sure almost every major successful LitRpg or cultivation novel found a way for you to follow along in a meaningful fashion. And I mean successful as in, again, putting up like 14K numbers, like that level of success. Which unfortunately brings us back to Ghost of the Truthseeker. Like, immediately he has like low stats, and then he gets 10 more, and then 5 more, and then 10 more. And they're just kind of thrown around willy-nilly. It brought me out of the book entirely. A lot of LitRPGs rip me completely out of the book because the stats don't mean anything. Like 0, nothing, zilch. So I don't care that they get +5 strength because there's no context for it. It doesn't enable anything. There's no feeling of we were at a wall that we couldn't pass until we got this next level of strength. Like you definitely feel over the hours of playing Baldur's Gate. Like you definitely felt chapter through chapter of reading Iron Prince, as you definitely felt book from book as Cradle progressed. You felt that the character that you were reading about, or in Baldur's Gate, the character that you were, there's a certain level you want to do more, but you can't because you don't have that +1, or the character didn't progress to like wood to gold yet, or this main character, or this character is, you know, still like a D strength and he's not at C strength yet. In Ghost of the Truth Seeker, I didn't care about his progression because I didn't see what he was working against, what he was going towards. There's like stat numbers just thrown around willy-nilly. They didn't mean anything for the most part. They were just kind of filler rewards for meh. And you just can't get into it. A lot of authors, even successful ones, some successful ones, make this mistake. They just throw meaningless stats and suddenly someone who had 10 strength initially has 1,000 strength. What does that mean? Nothing, because if you actually thought about it, it wouldn't make sense. Like, especially if you were to imagine that in a D&D scenario. Yeah, go into 20 strength and I can jump clear across the board. If I had suddenly 1,000 strength, I could leap to the moon. Yeah, it's not really making a whole lot of sense there, is it? Nah, not so much. But they're just doing that as a meaningless reward to throw at the character to signify stronger. I think one LitRpg that's kind of on the fence between like making that mistake and not making that mistake would be good old Salvos over here. Always been one of those books I'm surprised hasn't caught on larger, because it's a fun, fantastic read, personally. And you do have a lot of stat increases that kind of get a little bit out of control, but there are sort of achievements that they're going for while they're getting all of these various stats that you do actually care about, whether it's evolutions or reaching a certain pinnacle in a stat and then it like evolves and becomes something new, and there's a set system where something evolves and becomes something new. So even though you're getting like a stat dump and it's kind of like quasi meaningless, you know that it's going towards that next evolution, which does make sense and you're rooting for. So it kind of has a little bit of both worlds there a little bit, but I think that's probably one of the reasons why I enjoyed this particular series so much. Because like the series that I've named already, you can follow along and it makes sense. Unlike Ghost of the Truth Seeker, where about halfway in, there was nothing to follow. It didn't really make sense. I didn't care about the progression, so I didn't care what the main character was doing. So I just stopped reading it. I just stopped reading it. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. And I hope more LitRpg authors think more about how their character is going to progress and how the reader is going to be able to follow how the character is progressing, so they can kind of anticipate where the character is going to try to go and just root for them to get there. Because it seems like all of the wildly successful LitRpgs have given their, or cultivation novels, have given that a lot of thought and made sure it was clear and concise. And I think that's a lot to do with the success of the books. So yeah, I hope more people learn from Baldurs Gate 3. I hope more LitRpg authors learn from some of these other wildly successful novels. And yeah, that's just my 2 cents. I really felt that as I've been spending hours and hours playing this new game. And just wanted to share that with y'all. Until next time, happy reading, everyone.